I'm giving the floor to our brilliant chair today, Professor Alison Phipps, from the UNESCO Chair in Refugee Integration Through Languages and the Arts at the University of Glasgow. So Alison, over to you.
Morantang Matanma, good morning. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Francesca, and thank you for holding us technically and in organisational terms, yourself and Tilly and the whole team that have put together this marvellous conference over this week. It's day 3, so people might be feeling a little jaded. So we're hoping that we'll give you a few provocations, a few discomforts to get you thinking, to get those intellectual and emotional juices flowing, but also a bit of a laid-back vibe at times that will help you just rest in things that you may not understand and be alongside them. Ubuntu, people-centered approaches. People-centered approaches to reducing inequality in heritage. If wars are made in the minds of people, then it's in the minds of people that the defences of peace must be constructed. That's the preamble to the founding documents of UNESCO, and therefore it's really fitting that we focus on people. People in the sense of the collective, and also people in the sense of the individuals caught up in decisions that states or collectives or other individuals in power or maybe not in power might make about tangible and intangible cultural heritage. The session today is acknowledging that the work of reducing inequality through people-centred and decolonising approaches is taking place in 2021 on a knife edge of scholarly comforts and discomforts. This is a vertiginous and dizzying time in the immensity of the scope of the task that many people are realising lies ahead of us. It's a moment that is bringing relief and comfort to some, those who have been on the peripheries and working really hard to try and hold on to what their heritage is, what their practice is, what they might wish to take from the ancestors and pass forward to the younger generation. But this work of trying to enable people-centered approaches also brings discomfort, dis-ease and unease to others. And so some of the questions that we're trying to address here, and to address in practice and purpose, as well as in theory, pertain to questions like how we live in and through the scholarship on this knife edge, what assumptions we bring when working on inequalities, whose inequality, who decides about knowledge and heritage practice. And what are the long-term assumptions that underpin understanding who is to speak and who is to perform decolonising or people-centred approaches, and why? What kinds of pedagogies in public might sustain new directions? And what, if any, might be the strengthening work of institutions, particularly thinking about Sustainable Development Goal 16 and the role of heritage institutions as strong institutions that might stabilise our past and our future, but which in and of themselves are often steeped in colonial histories, in legacies of theft, in robbery, in destruction, in then the work of salvage and living with the trauma of broken objects in broken places with broken histories in the past, but also ongoing in the present. How can researchers work with practitioners and policymakers at every level of society, including particularly those who are practitioners, researchers and policymakers, but who don't draw a salary for that work, who do it in their communities on the edges of the world, just trying to make sure that we continue to live in a world of great diversity. So in order to try and do some of this work with you in the next 2 hours, obviously this is a task for 200 years, but in order to begin to do this, then I'm joined today by 4 wonderful colleagues at different stages in their career. Some of them are late career researchers in heritage practice and early career researchers in the work that they are doing. But each of them has a personal and particular story to tell about how they are integrating people-centered approaches to the sustaining and decolonizing of heritage in their work. So I'd like to just introduce them to you. First of all, I'm introducing Nadensua Todro, who is a research assistant working with me at the University of Glasgow, a Ghanaian garment designer and Ga music composer and singer with a background in oral tradition knowledge and research interests in West African Adinkra symbols as communicative tools that are printed on textiles. Dr. Gamali Todro, artist in residence and lecturer and creative director of the Ha Orchestra at the University of Glasgow. Again, working with the UNESCO chair and with myself and with the MIDEC hub at the University of Glasgow and University of Coventry, researching and teaching in creative arts and translating cultures, language and education, and with a focus on African diaspora music, video, film directing, production, story and storytelling. And you'll hear a little more from them in a moment. I'd then like to introduce Tesfalem Yemane, who is a PhD researcher at the School of Sociology and Social Policy at the University of Leeds. Tesfalem is building on the work of Joseph Nye, his concept of soft power, and examining the destination preferences of Eritrean refugees and asylum seekers who arrive in the UK and their post-arrival experiences, but also working with the charity Retas in Leeds and the operations director of Growing Points, a charity working with migrants, their heritages and languages across England and Wales, looking again at the way in which heritage might be preserved and sustained. And then finally, Dr. Carly Bagelman, who is a lecturer at Liverpool Hope University. Carly grew up on the Coast Salish territories in British Columbia. She completed her MA in Cultural and Social Political Thought at the University of Victoria and worked as a curriculum designer for Critical Thinking Consortium at the University of British Columbia, completing a PhD in education at the University of Glasgow. And her work considers the colonising role of education in Canada and the UK, as well as anti-colonial pedagogies and practice. And then I'd just like to welcome all of you, everybody who's joined us from all over the world, who are part of these people-centred processes on the margins, on the peripheries. Some I'm seeing in Portugal. I've just noticed come up in the chat, people from all over the world, someone in Saltaire. It's just wonderful to see these localities and this spread of people who are joining us to hear the stories of the people joining you today. But before we move to hear first of all from Carly, I'd like to invite Gamali and Nadensua to welcome us in song.
Lawe, 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 miada pelu. Lewe miada pelu. Blow, 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 blow. Do, 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 pomayona zolio. Blow, 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 pomayona zolio. Sikalele madaju. Blow, 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 blow. Mau si me miela ya nya miau agbamanya we. Jito si me miela ya nya miau agbamanya we. Minongjo mi dogbera agbeno kaka magbache pamayo. Agbeno kaka magbache pamayo. Blowe miada pelu. Blow, 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 blow. Blowe, lewe miada pelo, lewe miada pelo, blow, 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 blow.
Thank you so much, Gemily and Nadensua, and for doing everything you do to keep that beautiful song alive as part of your intangible cultural heritage. So I'd like to move to our first speaker on the panel, and Carly's going to speak for about 10 minutes about the work that she has been doing on reducing inequalities and people-centred approaches. Carly, the stage is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really pleased to be here with you. And really, today, I'm just going to share some pictures with you. So it should be an easy opening to the day. Just give me a moment to open the slideshow here. So as Alison mentioned, I'm from the West Coast of Canada. And really, as part of my doctoral research, which was in looking into decolonizing pedagogies and using children's literature as a sort of a medium to do this and to open those kinds of conversations about heritage and unsettling colonial narratives. I ended up working on illustrating and writing a picture book called Greece. So what you're looking at right now is the cover of that picture book. So the research was carried out on a small island off of Vancouver Island, where I grew up. This island is called Alert Bay, or Yalis, and it has around 1,500 permanent residents there, and it's really home to the Namgays First Nation people, as well as their non-Indigenous neighbors. And this island has gone through quite an intense experience of colonization, with the presence of a residential school on the island, which coercively removed children from their homes for many, many years, in the spirit of colonizing children and, quote, killing the Indian in the child. So you can see in the image here on the cover, really sort of addressing the kind of scars of colonization that this community has gone through. This book is celebrating a particular food item that's really central to the culture of the island. And this is called grease. This is one of the names for the oil. And what you can see on the cover is a big jug of grease. And inside are a number of cut and paste images that I got from the Royal British Columbian Archives. The idea here was to visually demonstrate how stories exist within stories, and the way in which a food item like grease is much more than just something on the table. It really embodies so much of the kind of colonial history, as well as the resistance and the resilience of this community. And the story begins by saying, this is the story of Greece, which has 3 names, 100 uses, and 1,000 stories. And the idea here was, to illustrate that, with the 3 names, the multilingual kind of experience of Namgay's people navigating their kind of environment as people who've faced colonization quite aggressively through colonial projects like the residential school, but also, really working to revive their first language, which is Kwakwala. The 100 uses was trying to focus on the ways in which, there's the material aspects of cultures, as well as the spiritual nature of the culture. And the 1,000 stories did touch on residential schools and the way in which cultural prohibition and other policies meant that, many generations were without Greece. So one thing that, this story basically is narrated by a Namges woman, which is really, the character is mirrored off of a woman that I met in my research, who kind of shared her experiences with me as a settler, as a visitor. So the story really is about settler listening or settler witnessing, and hearing the stories of Namges people talking about their experience with Greece, and how relevant it is and how important it is to their self-understanding and their lives. So you can see here from this image, basically what I had done to create some of the illustrations was I visited the Royal British Columbian Museum and Archives. And what I noticed was there were real problems with Indigenous peoples accessing these archives. So there were loads of restrictions for accessing these visual records. They often had to pay for things like photocopies. And of course, like Alison has mentioned in her opening statement, these are often robbed or stolen images and records. And so even the practice of salvaging, it requires that Indigenous peoples, once again, have to sacrifice. So I noticed this when I was sitting in the archives for many months doing research, and I was quite determined to make those resources public. What I noticed was that in the archives, it was stipulated that you couldn't share the images because they were copyrighted, so you would have to have special permissions. And I saw this as another barrier to making these images accessible and public, which really these images didn't belong to the archive. So my illustration used these images from the archive. In order to use them, I had to cut and paste them. And this helped me to kind of fall within the category of fair use or fair dealing. So when you manipulate an image, as you can see here with this example, when you scribble over top of it or you cut it and you paste it, you no longer fall subject to those copyright laws that have been established by kind of colonial practices. So I think of this as somewhat of a metaphor for, unsettling and disruption, the cutting and the pasting. You do need to ruin in some ways. You need to destroy the records in order to kind of reconceptualize them, make them public, allow them to have new meaning. So throughout the book, like I mentioned, the Greece tells, 1,000 stories. And of course, the narrator, the Namges woman who narrates the story, only tells a few. And this, gives you a hint that you're only ever scratching the surface when it comes to being a settler witness. You can be very honored to learn some things about the Indigenous culture, the Indigenous community that you're visiting as a settler. But you're never fully, embedded in the kind of knowledges. You're simply a witness to that. And as a part of the settler witnessing methodology, which Negi and Regan established, really through their work, listening to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, which was a response to the residential schools, they really say, there's a responsibility within Indigenous pedagogies and epistemologies that when you listen to stories, you have a responsibility to store what you've heard and to share it. And so that's what the role of the settler is in listening to story. And so that's what I've tried to do through this book. So one of the stories that she tells was about cultural prohibition in Canada, when potlatches, and specifically Inequalities, which were the potlatches in which Greece was shared and celebrated and feasted on, that was made illegal. And as you could see from the slide previous, a lot of the feasting bowls and regalia was stolen from the government. People were in prison for celebrating in these times. So she talks about how that cultural prohibition affected the community, but then she also talks about how now the Inequalities are happening again. And when they pour the grease on the fire, which is something that they do in these Gleitnagilas, the fire just leaps up to the top of the big house, and it's this very beautiful kind of show. So I wanted to kind of emphasize that as this sort of act of reclamation as well. Another kind of aspect of the book that I wanted to showcase, this was really important to the Indigenous elders that I was working with, was the role of language in this kind of reclamation of heritage and celebration of heritage. So in particular, the words that were most commonly used, and unfortunately, Kwakwala, the language, because of the aggressive colonization, especially through education with the residential schools, there are only really a handful of fluent Kwakwala speakers. And there's this real sort of, there's a great worry in the community that those languages, the ways of speaking, the ways of thinking that are tied up in those languages will be lost when elders pass away. Sorry. So 2 words that were really widely used and treasured were these words, Wees and Goon. And Wees means precious boy, and Goon means precious girl. Because this is a children's picture book, I also wanted to kind of emphasize just how much children are at the center and the heart of this cultural heritage of sharing Greece and working and living in a Nambese community. I also wanted to focus on the ecological and place-based kind of relationship with Greece, because this is something that was conveyed as very important, in explaining the process of making Greece. You'll see that, she explains, before we catch the ulakin, we give thanks. So again, this is about establishing a very specific relationality with the more than human, or the animal and the plant worlds. Again, on the relational front, I just wanted to emphasize that, Greece, again, it has many uses, and its deep cultural significance and significance to the heritage of this place. So I think I'll just close with talking about the sort of provocation that the book ends on, which is really the narrator, the Namgese narrator, shares with the listener, the set witness, that there has been a great environmental degradation on the land, and she's worried that they might not always have their special oil with 100 uses and 1,000 stories. So this is sort of the discomfort that the reader is left with, in a sense, thinking about now understanding the importance of Greece to the community and the richness of it, but also the sort of responsibility to think and to act differently. So this is really just a chance to share these images and ways of sort of presenting cultural heritage in a way that opens dialogue, in the spirit of dialogue.
Thank you so much, Carly, and for bringing that particular perspective of settler listening and settler witness, and for the words that you've spoken, which are hard words to hear for all of us, and that need us to slow down and take our time with them. The coercive removal of children from their home, the ways that were planned for the killing of the Indian in the child, the 1,000 stories, the spiritual nature of the culture, the many generations who were deprived of Greece, and then the way that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has started to engage with the 1,000 stories and has let you have a small place within that to work out and to listen hard in the archive to how you might store and share and show with gun that the child is precious, and that we might be able to be in a place where we can pause, we can allow the comfort and discomfort to be what it is, and we can give thanks to you and to the beauty of the work that you have found, salvaged and brought back for people that is more than human. We can be part of being grateful for Greece. Thanks so much, Carly. And we will now move on to our second speaker on this panel. So Tesfalem, I'm also now going to invite you to come up into the spotlight, as they call it, and also to share your slides. Do, if you've got questions, pop them in the chat for Carly or for Gamali. Some beautiful comments just coming in here, just as Tesfalem's clicking his slides. Tesfalem, do you want to make that on the slideshow view? So if you want to click for the slideshow from the start, we can then see your slides as they come up. That's fantastic. All right, over to you. If you want to unmute, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alice, and thank you very much. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. To be honest, I'm feeling a bit nervous because the discussions, the topics are out of my comfort zone. So what I will do today is not a presentation, but maybe throw in some questions in the form of my personal reflection as someone who was born in, and raised up in Eritrea and near the capital city, the little Rome, the Piccolo Rome, to use the colonial reference of the capital city of Eritrea. And my reflection is in terms of the Art Deco, the buildings we have, and the fact that this has been entered into the UNESCO recognition and registration as Asmara as a World Heritage Site. So what I will do in this presentation, in this talk, is I'll just give a very brief introduction of Asmara and maybe Eritrea, and then I will share some slides about some of the Art Deco buildings, colonial buildings in Asmara. I will also share our indigenous monastic sites, shrines and church, and important archaeological and historical sites in Eritrea that I think should have been considered for UNESCO recognition. And I will share my thoughts in terms of why I think they hold a very, very important resource in terms of them being eligible for recognition. So there is UNESCO World Heritage Site and the coloniality of its Art Deco is the title of my reflection. Yeah, okay. So just briefly about Eritrea. Eritrea is a very small country in Northeast Africa, the second newest nation state in Africa, very small but a diverse country, 9 different ethnic groups. On a very conservative estimate, maybe 50-50 in terms of the religious proportion in the country. So it became officially an Italian colony in 1890, and it was an Italian colony from 1890 to the end of the Second World War. Just maybe coming back to Asmara, Asmara is the capital. It was made the capital of the Italian colony in 1890. History has it recorded Asmara means in Tigrinya to be united. So legend has said that there were 4 different clans, adjacent clans in the highlands in what is today's Asmara, and the wisdom of the women in those 4 different clans, the men decided to unite those clans, and the name emerged from the united. The 4 have united. Say Arba'at Asmara. So the name Arba'at 4 has been removed, and then we have got the today's as Asmara. Asmara was built as part of the Italian colonial project, the Orientale Italiana, Italian colonial project to establish an East African colony. So it was a very, very important military stronghold, but it was also a hub, an epicenter of racial segregation. Asmara was racially segregated. There were places and parts of Asmara where the indigenous people, Eritreans, were not allowed to go. And so these are some of the places, the buildings, the roads that we celebrate now by way of entering them into the UNESCO World Heritage. So as an Eritrean, what do I celebrate? So I always ask myself these questions. This is a bird's eye view of Asmara. So Asmara entered into the UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2017, and because it met two important criteria of the UNESCO for its value in the interchange of human values, culture, technology, arts, and urban and planning and design. An outstanding example of building architectural, technological ensemble and landscape. As important as historical, factual these are, as an Eritrean, sometimes I ask myself, okay, which part of Asmara, which part of the architecture, which part of the outstanding interchange of human values are actually represented in what is today's Asmara and what is now has been recorded and registered in UNESCO. And given that Asmara was the colonial capital, is the worth celebrating it as an important historical treasure and as important archaeological treasure from an Eritrean perspective. So these are some of the colonial Art Deco in Asmara, imperial, which were designed as part of the imperial project. This is the Fiatelero. The one on the top right is today's Minister of Education. It has it's symbols related to fascist Italy. Now it's housed to Eritrea's Minister of Education, which is again the paradox about decolonizing our thinking, decolonizing the building, decolonizing our discourses on education, which starts with the building, with the physical nature of the building. The one on the bottom right side is the cathedral in the capital, downtown Asmara. So these are some important Art Deco, and what I will do in the second part is share some images of our religious monastic sites, historical sites, and archaeological sites, which I think represent which are the repertoire of our traditional life, our history, our culture, our art, our language, our everything, but which are not only also localized in an Eritrean context, which are also a very, very important melting pot of human intercultural hubs, which reach as far as Greece, the Hellenistic era, as far as ancient India, as far as Rome, as far as ancient Egypt, a very, very important commercial hub, which forms part of today's Red Sea, eastern lowlands of Eritrea. So the first one is Matara, an important historical and archaeological site dating back to 700 BC, which again connects the ancient port city of Adulis, which dates back to thousands of years, and which was a very, very important hub of trade, intellectual exchange, diplomacy. So this is located on the highlands of Eritrea and then links the lowlands of Eritrea, the coastal areas of Eritrea with the highlands of Eritrea, expanding as far as Ethiopia, today's Aksum and part of the Aksumite kingdom. The second on the right corner is Ohaito, again, a very, very important historical and archaeological site, a link between the Aksumite civilization, Adulis and the pro-Aksumite civilization. The last one on the top corner, and again, maybe I want to give an example of this, is the remnant of the first ever built mosque in Eritrea, in the world, I should say, in 612, with the coming of Islam. The followers of Prophet Muhammad were persecuted in Mecca. Sorry, so they crossed the Red Sea. They went to what is today's Ethiopia and Eritrea, and the then Aksumite king during the Aksumite civilization, during the Ottoman kingdom, the king accepted them. The king accommodated them. The king gave them sanctuary. They were persecuted. They were chased by the Qurayshi from today's Saudi Arabia, and the king refused to hand them over to the kings. So they went through trials and tribulations, but eventually they were allowed to integrate, settle in the region today. And what it tells us is the importance and the conceptual, maybe historical importance of sanctuary, conviviality, welcomeness, embracing. Maybe I'm just saying them in very suggestive terms because I haven't done any research on that and I'm not a historian, but this could be one of the most important epistemological sites of conviviality and sanctuary in terms of how people came together, tolerate each other, defied the religious differences, and how people were offered refuge and sanctuary in that specific moment of history. And this is why I'm arguing that they should be considered for recognition. Again, these are three different monastic sites. So monastic sites for us they're not only just contemplative retreating sites. They are also a very, very important reporter of our way of life. They are very important hubs of our social organization. They are very important way of guiding societies, literature, very important aspects of our identity. Again, the first one is the Port of Adulis. I mentioned that. We've got Ge'ez is the indigenous alphabet that developed during the Aksumite kingdom. Okay, so maybe finally, just final reflection. What I want to do in this final bit is again my own reflection on living in Eritrea and living with the Eritrean community in the UK. So hence the idea of the displaced locus of culture, the displaced half and the carrier of our cultures. And I'm not doing a presentation, but I want to share some stories with you for us to maybe think in terms of how the culture is at the danger of loss. So it's displacement, exile, and the cultural loss. And so the first example, and I want to share, is the case of exiled refugee artists. We know, I'm talking about the Eritrean community here, there are many artists, songwriters, singers, composers, poets, comedians, and these are the individual carriers of our culture, our heritage, a very, very important part of our identity. When with exile coming here to the UK, what happens to them and what happens to us it's a cultural loss. It's a case of a cultural loss because in trying to negotiate the difficulty regime recognitions in the UK, they are overwhelmed. We are overwhelmed. And sometimes people end up splitting their time between bringing bread on the table, working as taxi drivers, working in the warehouses, and pursuing the dreams. And there is a continuous fight, there is a constant fight between pursuing the dreams at the individual level, but also we also see the danger at the community level. So I have friends who work as taxi drivers, but who are also very, very important artistic and cultural voices and figures in our community. And the second example is, it's about church. Two examples about church. The second one is, I was going to a church in an area where I live, and someone told me that they were keeping the Ark of the Covenant in a garage, the symbol of the Ark of Covenant in a garage, because they cannot afford to rent a church. They cannot afford to buy a church. So what they do is they go to the church during the weekends, but they take the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in the garage during the weekdays. And the second one is a very good example, an afflicting example of people working in low-grade jobs in warehouses, but also contributing, pulling their resources together and buying the church. They bought the church, And the church, in addition to it's been an important spiritual space, it's a very, very important cultural, communal space for us as well. It's a church where we teach our children the language, their culture, a very, very important pastoral services, for example, communion, confessional services, weddings, burial ceremonies. I've been there. I go there, and when we got there, it was an abandoned industrial site. Now they have turned it to a very beautiful, welcoming building, a church. The final one is I just wanted us to reflect on the ongoing war in Tigray, in Ethiopia, and what it has meant with the reports of, there are major reports about attacks on churches, monasteries, and mosques. And these are very, very important hubs of the cultural heritage and literary representations and identities of the societies in the region. And I just wish things will go back to normalcy, and those important religious and cultural artifacts in those spaces will be restored. And I think with that, I should stop here, I think. Thank you.
Nakanyeli, Amlaki Muskan. Thank you, Tesfala, for a really informative talk about an area of the world that many people know very, very little about. Particular thanks to you for focusing on what it means when recognition at World Heritage level is given to the practices of fascist, imperialist, racial segregation, and what it means to live in a country where there is continuing oppression and from which many have had to flee worldwide, but where your Ministry of Education is housed in those buildings, that these histories matter. But also thank you so much for highlighting the work and the labour that refugees and exiles worldwide from Eritrea and also from other contexts are presently having to do to try and just to hold together with no resource what the cultural heritage, the language is. I think for me the poetry, the profound poetry in your talk just now was when you said we are keeping the Ark of the Covenant in the garage. And what it means for people who are working 90 hours a week to try and scrape together the money to do family reunion, or who are trying to just get their first job, or asylum seekers who have no right to work in the UK and often in other countries too. But what they do is try and build what is their container, which isn't necessarily a museum. It might be a church or a mosque, as you have highlighted, to hold the container for tangible and intangible cultural heritage. It was really reminding me of time I spent in Calais in the refugee camps there and saw these beautiful churches built by Eritrean refugees and Ethiopian refugees out of plastic and sticks and paint, and where people could come together to sing and to move their bodies in a way that people have done for centuries. So thank you so much for that and for the provocations that brings. We're going to move to our last panel for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll move into breakout rooms. And just as Gamali and Nadensua are moving and the slides are coming up, just to acknowledge an important provocation that has come from Carlos. Hola, Carlos. Thank you so much for being with us and for your provocation and for asking us about how we measure this and for highlighting the fact that people-centered approaches are not easily measurable. There's lots we can say about that, but I'd just like to highlight the work we've been doing with UNESCO on the framework of cultural justice as opposed to inequality measurement, and the way in which the tools of measurement are not equally distributed. It's very hard in many parts of the world to actually move into an area and measure what the destruction has been. It takes many years. In the Tigray region at the moment, we know that there are no observers able to go in and to do this work. And often it's after humanitarian relief that the cultural work begins in areas of destruction. So I think you've raised a really important point, and a really important point about the inequalities of distribution of measures that we have that might enable people to do cultural justice, to engage in the work of cultural justice. And I'm sure we'll have much further discussion about this in the breakout rooms. But for now, I'd like to move to Gamali and Nadensua to share with us the work they've been doing on people-centred approaches in Glasgow as Ghanaian members of the Scottish Society. So Gamali and Nadensua, the spotlight is yours.
Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you, Kali, and thank you, Tesfalem, for your very powerful presentations. We are going to tell you the story of how we encountered Adinkra symbols in the bowels of the Hunterian Museum's storage space. Adinkra symbols from Ghana are a very large body of symbols that encapsulate the philosophies of the Akan people and other people in Ghana. The immediate historical context of Adinkra creative links and how it came about as part of our creative resource and arts practice can be traced to this encounter that I just spoke about with the symbols in the Hunterian Museum in the University of Glasgow in 2008.
Gamali was invited to be one of the presenters at the Diversity Training Day event on the 5th of March 2008 as part of the activities marking the bicentenary of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade.
The publicity information for the event posted on the university's website stated that this special training day for adults takes place in the Hunterian Museum's Kelvin Gallery and has been developed as part of the Hunterian bicentenary celebrations to mark the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. The event is open to everyone, students, staff, educationists, and anyone with interest in diversity issues.
So he thought that a good starting point will be the museum-owned large storage of locked up artifacts to gain an insight into what resources already exist within the museum and to draw artistic inspiration as well as acquire a deeper knowledge about past and existing links between the Hunterian Museum, the slave trade era, and the histories of its abolition.
The expedition to the Hunterian storage revealed several pieces of objects, most of which were not linked to any specific detailed historical and cultural information. These were unfortunately displaced cultural objects of varied historical and cultural significance. Their displacement, to me, results in the deletion of their function and value, and their isolation from the general public was a seal on any possibility of rediscovery, reuse, and reevaluation.
So among these artifacts were objects from Ghana that carries the Akan Adinkra symbols.
In many ways, these reflected the demise of the dignity of the freedoms of people captured and sold as slaves during the period of the transatlantic slave trade, where whole communities were erased and displaced alongside their cultural heritage.
So Gamali decided to focus on Adinkra, the symbols, their artistic, communicative, philosophical, and social values for the presentation of the 5th March 2008. For the 5th March 2008, the presentation took the form of folklore or folktale with music and questions and answers.
Slide, please. I named the presentation Nyamidua, a symbol that represents the concept of the altar of God and stands for the value and significance of the forked stake that holds a pot of purification herbs in water, usually seen in the traditional homestead where prayer and libation is made. The herbal water held in the pot is also used as face cleanser. Does that ring a bell in coronavirus situation?
The interest generated from this event added to the earlier idea of thinking about ways to set Adinkra free in Scotland and allow its value to be felt in the lives of people across Scotland. This led to the planning of collaborative initiatives between Gameli and his friend and colleague Ninian Perry of Paragon Music.
Ninian and I first met at a community event in 2003, where we were both leading and presenting performances at the Royal Concert Hall in Glasgow. Since then, we've collaborated on music projects from time to time.
The collaboration with Ninian was also our first collaborative work with the Kelvin Grove Galleries and Museums, and the second public presentation of Adinkra through music, textile, and fashion.
We named it Akuma Ntuaso, Joined Hearts. We hung 3 large backdrops with Adinkra boldly printed on them and set up a desk for people to print their own chosen Adinkra symbols. Nadinswa made her first Adinkra symbols collection that were worn proudly and elegantly by young new Scots and their friends who stepped onto the catwalk of the foyer of the Kelvin Grove Museum with live music from the Glasgow Highlight Band and Paragon Music. Since then, Nadinswa has made several clothes and dressed many proud models, including Professor Alison Phipps, on many community engagement fashion shows. Today, her Obasima Ghanaian wedding gown design and make is on display at the Kelvin Grove Museum.
Prior we bakwane bo ukabo mwa embo onye mumienye bakon. But it was not until when we partnered with the Glasgow City Council Education Department and later on with the University of Glasgow that we felt the Adinkra has become truly freed from the bowels of the storage of the museum.
Slide, please. We visited several schools, libraries, and communities in Glasgow and other local councils like the South Lanarkshire Council, Stirling, and East Dunbartonshire. We went on to create a special popular schools and communities workshop project we named the Adinkra Links Workshop Series.
The workshops are on request and break the links of the chains of captivity and create new captivating links of hearts between us and those we encountered on our journey of interaction through engaging with them in creating new songs, stories, and textile prints using the Adinkra symbols as the interactive and creative resource.
Slide, please. We have continued to create, link, and share with children and young people, many adults of many walks of life, other creative artists, educators, and academics. We are part of the Creating Welcoming Learning Environments project at the University of Bristol's School of Education, where we work with local teachers and introduce them to how to use Adinkra to create a welcoming school and classroom environment for all their students, including so-called migrant children.
The work of the UNESCO Chair in Refugee Integration through Languages and the Arts.
And the UNESCO Arts Lab.
As well as the MIDEC Hub, the South-South Migration in Inequality and Development Hub, where we are also using Adinkra symbol to facilitate thinking about our research.
We set out to set Adinkra free in Scotland. Little did we know or consider that our own culture and intellectual freedoms were directly tied into that act. Our understanding of ourselves and our understanding of people we have encountered and interacted with has shown us that we are all linked and interdependent on multiple levels.
13 years on, we have set up our international writing exchange network, the Adinkra Links Network, working with writers across the world with a focus on but not limited to unpublished young writers.
Particularly disadvantaged girls and young women, those in Africa and the African diaspora, and hosted their writing and interacting with each other through exchanging their work, even in the middle of the challenging COVID-19 global pandemic.
Adinkra Links has published the following people entered poetry, people-centered, and entered poetry anthologies since September 2019, making it possible for many young and adult poets to become published poets for the first time. The first one is Funtun Funufu Sint.
Then we had Song of a Caged Bird.
Then we have Mazungumzo Yashari.
Then Ancestral Code.
Then Aya the Resilient.
Oh, and Adinkra Links has published Nadinso's own practice research and field project website, www.nadinso.com. To have such a valuable, interactive, creative resource that allows us to freely engage, explore, create, and share with the rest of the world, just says to us that the world is well-resourced and that there is enough to go around everybody. Slide, please. And that we were right to set Adinkra free in Glasgow, Scotland. Lododora limia dona lemiada, Lododora limia dona lemiada, Lododora limia dona lemiada, Lododora limia dona laoba, Lagada magla de chiolo, Lagada magla de chiolo, Lagada magla de chiolo, Lagada magla de chiolo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gamli and Nadensua, and also for ending with the slide Funtu Fanumfu Denchen Fanumfu, the Siamese crocodile that shares its stomach. And for all the work that you've been doing in your research and in your artistic practice, combining this to set these Adinkra symbols free across Scotland from their hidden place in the bowels of a museum. This has been very much the work that you've done from the UNESCO chair yourselves, and is a really exciting demonstration of the different ways in which different forms of heritage practice, tangible and intangible, might come together and be made into new forms of work that are demonstrating different ways of approaching what we're calling people-centered approaches, but also which begin to address the inequalities. For centuries, the approaches to heritage were very much dominated by a particular class, a particular gender, a particular way of approaching these questions. It's vital, and I've seen the chat between various people saying that it's vital we remember and we educate people about the sites of violence, of colonialism, but at the same time, it's also absolutely vital that we hold the memory of what has been done, and that there are many places where approaches to heritage have allowed that to happen, different ways according to different traditions, that people might be honoured, sometimes by erasing a site because it is so troubling to what people have experienced, but at other times deliberately keeping it alive because it's absolutely vital we remember, and that there is no universal approach that is right for one generation or in any one moment. These are all part and parcel of the provocations that Tesfalem, Kali, Gamali and Nadensua have brought to us from the different ways they approach this question of people-centered approaches and of ways in which they, in their own way, in their own lives, in their own research and practice, have been attempting to address the question of how inequality might be reduced. We're going to now move into breaking into breakout rooms for some discussion and for some questioning. And there'll be facilitators in your breakout rooms to prompt you with some of the challenges and questions from the collaborators. There'll be questions around whether we can measure reduction in inequality and who has access to the measuring tools, and also to the kinds of resources that are required for this. There'll be questions around the provocations from Kali and Tesfalem, from Gamali and Nadensur, about how we might do this in a way that is life enhancing, and do this in a way that might be enabling us to confront difficult memory and to look at what has been erased or rendered invisible and what has been held up as an example. There'll be note takers in the sessions who will then be able to feed points back for thinking about policy briefs and future practice. But it's worth you really focusing, I think, in these sessions on what's made you feel uneasy, what you've maybe disagreed with in the discussion of heritage and cultural justice, and where it is that you feel safe. You feel there's something that's emerging here where you find and feel a voice. Some of you may feel that these are just case studies and they don't get us anywhere. Some of you may feel that these are important evidences of ways in which things have been done differently. There's no expectation that there will be agreement or that argument is what might resolve the tensions. As Boaventura de Sousa Santos has said in his work on the end of the cognitive empire, it is not necessarily argument, debate, and cognition that will actually allow us to find a way through. So maybe have a think together about where you feel uneasy and where you feel comfort, and that will be different for different people, about what cultural heritage can do to better contributing to reducing the discomforts and the comforts of others. In other words, how might cultural heritage become more equitable for more people and more comfortable for more people? And how might we discern around that as to what we do, who steps back and who steps forward? What policy change would you like to see on this topic internationally, in the UK, in your own context, but also maybe thinking about policy change in your home, in your family, in your community, thinking about what Tesfalem was saying about the use of a local garage for enabling the policy that came together out of a diaspora exiled community to try and find a way of placing an object that was precious and a set of practice that are precious in a place where it can be held for a while. What kinds of future research and practical actions might be necessary, and what kinds of leadership and organisation and accountability. So we're going to allow you to move into your breakout rooms now. I'm really being made to work for my money today, and apologies to the group that I was in for getting a little cut off at the end of the story about this scarf. You can all just be curious for a while now. We started off by actually letting people list out discomforts in talking about people-centred approaches to reducing inequality. And a lot of words come up. Things that people feel uncomfortable with included liberal assumptions, Western philosophy and theory, guilt, the exclusion of indigenous knowledges, the belief that people-centered approaches might be disruptive, memories, the lack of respect for emotional connections, cultural loss, the directionality between North and South, positionality, and my own position is what someone said within this. Engaging meaningfully with communities about archaeology in the past. The fear of producing guilt in people when speaking of difficult things. Feeling uncomfortable about relationships, uncomfortable about talking about rather than with or from our community. And then we moved from the hard stuff to talking a little more about the things that people might feel joy in and delight or ease or comfort. And there was a real sense that openness and an honest naming of things and speaking about it, speaking about what's hard, is also a more comfortable place. Passion, solidarity. A move to those words from the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commission: storing and sharing, listening, people as fellow human beings, discovering something new or a new point about the past, the scales falling from your eyes and thinking, gosh, I had no idea the Ark of the Covenant was in a garage in Leeds. The need for deep human connection, but also the layers of connection and layers of realization. A feeling of grounding in the work, making people feel a sense of warmth as important. The belief that it's never too late to change practice as giving people a sense of more ease. The importance of friendship and layers of understanding, and the perspective that children bring and children's place in this. And then we had an argument. We started to debate, will it be changed by measuring it and sticking to measurements, or will it be changed by approaches that are people-centered, that are outside institutions, that don't just rely on measurement and are about other ways of thinking about things that might not be measurable. And I think that debate is a debate, as I was saying at one point, that's right at the heart of the arts, humanities, sciences nexus within research. It's an endless debate about quantitative and qualitative and practice-led methodologies. And you won't be surprised that having tried to resolve this tension for 100 years in the academies, we haven't resolved it in the half hour in the breakout room. But there were some really interesting questions coming up about how we measure and about the importance of centering the feelings that people have around this and enabling the one to serve the other. So in short, that's a summary. We didn't get to the end of it. There's plenty more to say, and there were plenty of provocations in the room.
Thank you, Alison. That's great, really. Can't fault that. Thank you very much for briefly summarising a lengthier discussion there. Gamaliel and Nardenswa, I believe you guys were in a different breakout room. Are you happy to feedback?
Yes. We had quite a lengthy chat, and at the end we decided that in the spirit of today's event, we would not do the feedback as one person or two people. We want to make it as people-centered as possible so that, the whole group can contribute to feeding back.
There was just so many resonances. I keep coming back to metaphors with music and grabbing notes. And my bit was asking you about whether you draw influences from other cultures and also where you're living now and looking at the ancient past. And we had a lovely conversation about bringing together cultures and with a dress that you had designed for an exhibition and linking together Benin cultures and Indian and connecting everything together. So we went off on a bit of a tangent there, which I enjoyed.
Yes, we are very much a group participation here, which was fantastic from Gamaliel and Na in the spirit of how we are all sharing with each other. I found our group discussion just fantastic. It was uplifting, it was positive, it's how we share and how we learn from each other. Like Dana, I think what made me really smile at one point was the joyous look on Na's face when she was talking about designing the gown, working with other cultures, other artifacts in Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow. And I think the things that I took away from this particular meeting was, I'll have to look at my notes here, but sharing, enrichment, uplifting, joy, and how we really do learn from each other. I would like to pass on to someone else in the group because I think we are more than one voice.
Okay, so there's a question there was a question posed by Rose in the chat box. She wanted to know whether heritage then can be a space where we give the gifts of culture that keeps on giving, and our heritage exchanges be a source of enrichment in a world where there is increasing impoverishment of different kinds, or is that too idealistic? So that is a question that Rose posed to us. And And we spoke about enrichment, we spoke about treasured opportunities, and now we came to come up with those concepts through sharing with others, but also through rediscovering what is our cultural heritage, and making decisions to act on the unfortunate situations that we find ourselves having discovered, very important aspect of our cultural heritage in storage, and that decision and what has resulted from that has shaped our lives. It's shaped our understanding, and it has shaped how we interact with others.
Hi. So for the group 3, we had quite a discussion on, education and culture. So one thing we agreed is that there's a place for education in colonization as much as there is in liberation. It has been used both as a tool in colonization and in liberation. We also agreed that we need to assign task forces that look at the holistic perspective of ways for proper education. But then the question was, what is the proper education? Who determines what's the proper education? When you look at it from indigenous perspective and to where we are right now to curriculum-based education. Then we also agreed that we need to address the oppression of indigenous people, their way of learning and education. We also agreed that the wealth of an education has to be beyond the curriculum, because mostly we work within a particular curriculum, and there is really not much allowed beyond that curriculum. So we need to look beyond a curriculum and find ways to learn beyond curriculums in our cultures. We need to give a voice to organized minorities and educate the educators and the education system about cultures and languages that have been here for the longest. And this was from someone who gave a story about a boy who spoke his indigenous language, and everyone around him couldn't understand until, his parents came forth and said that they were Native Americans. And it took a lot for, the school, the teachers to understand that this language still exists. So we need to step out and educate the educators and the system about some of these languages. I think as I go on, someone will join me Tawana will join me if I leave something out, because there was so much that was discussed. I'm trying to touch on the points that I put down. So the challenge with educating the educators is actually not from the indigenous people giving out the information. It is actually on the education system opening itself up to learning about these indigenous languages. That is more of a challenge than, the people offering themselves. It is easier for people to offer themselves than for the system to accommodate them. So, but we agreed that it has to be beyond the curriculum. So we also agreed that as much as we need to learn about some of these cultures and where we are coming from, we also need to unlearn some of these cultures, and we need to go back to where we are coming from and start afresh, educate our communities on new cultures and how to have better education systems, because some cultures and the way they do the education kind of are a threat to themselves. They are a threat to themselves, and if they're left to continue like that, they might, they cause more damage to themselves than good. So I will bring in Tawana to help me with the rest of it, to give in a point or two. Tawana, please.
Thanks so much, Eunice. I'm just chipping in at the end, but yeah, I mean, you've captured what the group was really grappling with. We really an important point was brought up by someone who is training teachers, and the example in Norway was cited where the young people, once these curricula that are more inclusive are set up, sometimes there are big issues with the young people uptaking the material. So there's something that needs to be looked at in terms of it's not just the intention or the setting up of these well-meaning curricula, but there are issues also with how are they to be better designed so that the young people who they are aiming at can find the material to engage with. Where the young person who has been on one of these courses and they had to leave because they ended up in a class with, I think, about 3 people only. So it's demotivating. We talked a lot about invisibility, and there was also a really important story about resistance. Sort of indigenous young people resistance, the story of a young boy who had been challenged at his school for singing a song in indigenous language and told he was singing nonsense. So there's also resistance within that. But yeah, we it's just about the indigenous knowledge not being acknowledged enough and not being seen as fit for purpose is a big issue. But yes, that's what I'm going to add. Thanks so much, Eunice, and thanks to everyone in our group for a great conversation.
Thank you so much, guys. That was a really great summary. And thanks, Eunice, as well, especially for participating. You're multitasking as tech for this session and a contributor, so you're a Wonder Woman. So I'm just going to now pass back over to Alison. I don't know if you have any final comments or anything to round off the session. Just bring it to a gentle close. That'd be fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tilly. Thanks, Francesca, and for Nomad IT and Praxis and UNESCO NC who've put this together. Just to maybe read through some words and that have struck me as I've been listening today, but then to hand over to Gamali and Nadensua to let us end with music rather than just with words, because I think there is much in what we're saying, and I really enjoyed that comment earlier in the chat that maybe some of these things are not resolvable. Maybe we're talking about permanent states of transforming conflicts. We're not talking about resolving the struggles that we have and finding new ways forward that are people-centered and that would reduce inequality, and that there are many different approaches to these. But these are just some of the words that I've heard today before I hand over to Gamali and Nadensua to close. And just before I do, to once again to thank all the facilitators, Tawana and Carly and Eunice in your breakout room, and also to thank Carly and Tesfalem and Gamali and Nadensua for sharing their work. And it's quite exposing to do it. I know that you were all really nervous beforehand. And so just to thank you again for holding your nerves and sharing with us and having the courage to say things that often it's hard for people to hear or to stay with. So here are some words: music, warmth, people, flower girls, garages, Greece, treasure, release, passion, grounding, loss, prayer, kwakwala, guilt, store, share, listen, funtu fanumfu, denchen fanumfu. Thank you.
Oh yeah, manyo mama, manko be, manfo be mi kra. Shoko, wencho langa no tiyo. Mamia basi Congo, keshe nyo wahala kao, keshe deke wahala chitowi. God damn it, rainbow down, kolebu adaroma. Ke mingo, ke mingo, ke mingo. Ke mingo, Ole mi koko, bona fe no kemiaka otana. Ole mi koko, bona fe no kemiaka otana. Temale gbejeke minye maya. Uma se gbejeke minye maya. Nkaya shinte pepa pe. Shinte pepa pe. Shinte pepa pe. Shinte pepa pe. Ole mi koko, boni afe no kemiaka otona pa. Ole mi koko, boni afe no kemiaka otona pa. Temale gbejeke minye maya. Uma se gbejeke minye maya. Nkaya shinte pepa pe. Shinte pepa pe. Shinte pepa pe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. That was great. I feel like we want to give you guys some practical information for the next session, but it seems a pity to end on such a non-musical note. So perhaps if Francesca just gives a brief summary of what's happening next, and then Gamelina Densra, if you wouldn't mind just rounding us out with a little bit more music.
Okay.
Sorry to ask so much. It's just so beautiful. Thank you.
Yes, everybody, what can I say? It's really a pity to end this way after this beautiful music, this beautiful word, this beautiful session. It was amazing and very emotional today. So thank you very much once again, everybody. Today we touched several themes like decolonizing approaches, indigenous language, cultural appropriation, and inclusive indigenous people and culture, and we are continuing this discussion on this topic later on this afternoon. So I invite you to join us for another wonderful session on indigenous decolonizing heritage practices. Today we have another special guest, Richard Kistabish, the president of Minwashing. So it will be another session full of surprise. I strongly recommend to attend the session. There will be it will be an English-French session, so we will offer live interpretation for all those interested in French. And but I would like also to remind you that there are other sessions where we can continue to explore some topics that clearly emerged today, like the needs to go beyond quantitative methods for evaluation and to look forward other ways that can be better consider the multifaceted aspect of heritage and heritage practices. So we have a session on evaluating the impacts of cultural heritage for sustainable development on Tuesday morning, Tuesday the 2nd of March morning, but also a couple of other two sessions try to focus on other aspects related to cultural heritage, such as how heritage can contribute to mental health and well-being of people on Monday afternoon, but also how creative industries and tourism can be used to move beyond just economic development, but also consider other aspects, and particularly the social and environmental ones. So after this overview about what is going to happen in the next days of our conference, I thank you very much once again. This session was so enriching for me, and I hope for all of you, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much again, everybody. Bye.
Keke mingo, keke mingo, keke keke, keke mingo mingo mingo. Keke mingo, keke mingo, keke keke, keke mingo mingo mingo. Ole mi koko, bona feno kemiaka otona pa. Ole mi koko, bona feno kemiaka otona pa. Kuma se gbejeke minye maya. Tamale gbejeke minye maya. Nkaya shinte pepa pe. Shinte pepa pe. Shinte pepa pe. Akamiete mebe maba shile. Akamiete mebe maba shile. Akamiete mebe maba shile. Akamiete mebe maba shile. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
guys.
thank
That's
you.
lovely. Thank you for the encore.